There is a kind of tiredness that regular sleep cannot fix. Not the tiredness of the body. That kind, a good night's rest would be enough to handle. This is something else. The kind that sits just behind your eyes, even when the lights are off. That keeps the mind running hours after you've decided to stop. That turns the very moment you should be resting into the moment you think the most, revisit the most, anticipate the most. If you are listening to this right now, you probably know exactly what we're talking about. This isn't weakness. It isn't a lack of discipline. It is the sign of a mind that was never given permission to truly stop. A mind that learned, over years of urgency and notifications and responsibilities that never quite end. That rest is something that happens later, after you solve it, after you finish it, after you get through all of it. And since later rarely arrives, rest rarely arrives either. More than 2,000 years ago, monks in the mountains of Asia discovered something that modern science is still trying to put into words. The mind doesn't stop working because you ask it to stop. It stops when you stop fighting it. And the only thing capable of doing that, not techniques, not breathing exercises, not countdowns, is stories. Stories that arrive beneath the resistance, that speak to the part of you that already knows how to rest, but has been slowly forgetting over years of urgency and noise and things that couldn't wait. You don't need to understand every teaching tonight. You don't need to analyze every metaphor. In fact, the less you try to understand, the more these stories will work. Because they weren't made for the part of the mind that analyzes and concludes. They were made for the deeper part, the one that already knows all of this, that has always known, and that only needs a moment of quiet to remember. In the next hour and a half, you will hear Zen stories that Buddhist masters used not to teach, but to let the mind finally go quiet. Settle your body now. If you are lying down, let the weight of your body sink a little deeper into whatever is holding you. Feel the points of contact. Your back, your shoulders, your head, and let each one rest with just a little more trust. If there is still tension somewhere, in your jaw, in your shoulders, in your hands, don't try to force it away. Just notice it. Often, simply being noticed is enough for tension to begin releasing on its own. Take one slow breath in, without forcing, and let it go. The journey begins here. Story. The lake with no bottom. In the mountains of southern China, there was a monastery so ancient that no one knew exactly when it had been built. The monks who lived there said the monastery had always been there, like the mountains themselves. That some things simply exist before any human memory, before any name, before any story that anyone might tell about them. The walls were dark stone, covered in moss in places, and the corridors were narrow enough that two people could barely pass each other at the same time. There was a constant smell of old wood and incense that had been burned for so long, it had become part of the stones themselves. At the center of the monastery, there was a lake. It wasn't large. You could walk around it in less than 5 minutes. But there was something about that lake that made every visitor stop and look longer than they had planned. The water was a blue so dark and so still that it seemed to have no bottom. On sunny days, the reflection of the surrounding mountains was so sharp that it was difficult to tell where the water ended and where the real stone began. A young student arrived at the monastery one afternoon, carrying a heavy backpack and an even heavier mind. He had traveled for weeks to get there, crossing valleys flooded by autumn rains and climbing trails that seemed to have no end. At some points, he had thought about turning back. The road was long, the cold was real, and there was a small voice in the back of his head that kept suggesting that none of this would help, that the peace he was looking for didn't exist anywhere, that it was a construction of a desperate mind that could no longer stand its own noise. But he kept going, and he arrived. The master received him without ceremony, without welcome speeches, without questions about the journey. He was an old man with completely white hair and eyes of a clarity that was mildly unsettling, not because they were penetrating in an intimidating way, but because they conveyed a stillness that seemed impossible, as though behind them there was a place where the noise simply didn't reach. Without saying a word, the master led the young man to the edge of the lake. They stood in silence for a long time. The wind moved the surface of the water gently. Birds passed overhead. The sun was beginning to descend behind the mountains, and the colors of the sky reflected on the dark surface with a delicacy that seemed almost unreal. The young man was restless. He had so many questions. He had spent years accumulating doubts about the nature of the mind, about suffering, about why certain memories returned in the most unexpected hours, about why he could rest his body, but never his head. And now that he was finally standing in front of someone who might be able to answer them, the old man was simply staring at the water as if there were nothing more interesting in the world. The young man's restlessness grew. He shifted slightly, breathed deep, thought about speaking, decided to wait, thought about speaking again.
Master.
Finally, when he couldn't stand the silence anymore. "Master," the young man said, and his voice sounded strangely loud in the quiet air. "I came from very far away. I have many questions about the mind, about suffering, about how to find peace in the middle of the chaos of life, about why my head never stops, even when my body is completely exhausted, about..." The master didn't answer. He bent down slowly, his knees protesting slightly, and picked up a small stone from the ground. He stood up and threw it into the lake with a calm and precise gesture. They both watched the circles expanding across the surface of the water. The point of impact was small. The stone wasn't large, but the circles kept expanding, wider and wider, touching the edges of the lake, reflecting faintly against the stones of the banks, and then, slowly, diminishing. "What do you see?" the master asked. "Waves," said the young man. "Circles expanding from the point where the stone fell." And now, the waves kept shrinking. The surface kept growing quieter. In less than a minute, the lake was completely calm again. The reflection of the mountains returned. It was as if the stone had never been thrown. "The lake went back to normal," said the young man. "The lake," said the master slowly, weighing each word, "never left normal. What changed was only the surface. Down below, the lake was still the entire time. The stones arrive, the waves appear, and down below, nothing. Still, always still." The young man looked at the dark water and tried to imagine what was down there. He imagined layers of water growing quieter and quieter as they descended toward the depths. He imagined the bottom, motionless, completely indifferent to what was happening at the surface. There was something in that image that resonated, something he couldn't fully name, but that he felt like a memory of something he had forgotten. Your mind, the master continued, is like this lake. What you call thoughts, worries, agitation, these are only stones thrown at the surface. They create waves. The waves are real. I'm not saying they aren't. But there is a depth in you that no stone reaches. That has never been disturbed. That is still right now, as we speak. The young man felt something strange in that moment. A kind of weight rising through his shoulders and dissolving. As if for an instant, just one fleeting, almost imperceptible instant, he had touched that depth the master was speaking of.
Washes away the dust of the
Not
world,
with his mind, with something
leaving
beneath
only
the
quiet
mind.
truth of the night.
How do I get there? He asked, almost in a whisper. The master looked at him with a faint smile, the kind of smile that has no irony, no superiority, that is simply the smile of someone who recognizes in another a question they themselves asked long ago. You don't get there, he said. You stop swimming toward the surface. That night, the young man slept beside the lake, wrapped in blankets that smelled of wood and thyme, listening to the silence of the mountains that was not really silence, but a layer of sounds so constant they became silence. The wind, the water, the distant night birds. And for the first time in years, he dreamed of nothing. The mind, for those hours, was as still as the water at the bottom of the lake, which had never stopped being still, which had been waiting for him all along, patient in the way that only very ancient things know how to be patient. There is a place in you, right now, as you listen to these words, that has not been touched by today's exhaustion. That does not carry the weight of unresolved conversations, of tomorrow's responsibilities, of memories that keep returning uninvited. That place doesn't need to be found, doesn't need to be earned, doesn't need to be deserved. It only needs to be remembered. Let the thoughts that are still passing through your mind pass like stones thrown in water. They create waves. The waves expand. And then, if you don't throw more stones, the surface grows still. You don't need to do anything right now. Only listen. Only be here, in this moment, on this surface that keeps growing quieter as the stories continue. Story 2. The Monk and the Rain. There was, in a monastery on the slopes of a mountain in the Japanese countryside, a monk known throughout the region for an uncommon quality. His ability to remain absolutely calm in any situation. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing something. Not the empty calm of someone who doesn't care. It was a calm that other monks could feel when they were near him. The way the temperature of a room changes when you light a fireplace. This monk's presence changed something in the air around him. The other monks of the monastery often watched him, trying to discover his secret. Because while they were agitated by the winter cold, the suffocating summer heat, difficult visitors and tasks that seemed never to end, this monk always seemed to be in a different state. Present, but not disturbed. Engaged, but not swept away. Like an anchor that allows the boat to move with the wind without being carried far from shore. One afternoon, in the middle of autumn, a storm arrived at the monastery without warning. It was the rainy season, and the storms in the mountains could be violent in ways that people from cities rarely experienced. The wind bent the tallest trees as if they were made of paper. The rain didn't fall. It struck, sometimes horizontal, with a force that turned the gardens into rivers within minutes. Thunder came in waves, first a distant growl, then a crack that made the windows shake in their frames. The monks ran for shelter. They stored the garden tools that were outside, closed the windows, brought in the basins that had been collecting rainwater. There was the brief but intense rush of people who need to protect themselves from something faster than they had anticipated. And then, from the covered corridor where they had gathered, one of the younger monks looked out into the garden and noticed something. The calm monk was still outside, standing in the center of the garden, completely motionless, the rain soaking his clothes completely, the wind disheveling what little hair he still had. He wasn't visibly meditating. He wasn't in any special posture. He was simply standing, looking upward, with an expression on his face that, as strange as it seemed from that distance, was one of absolute peace. The monks watched him from the window, confused, some worried, some a little irritated by what seemed like an unnecessary display, as if the man were trying to prove something by staying outside in the storm. The storm lasted almost an hour. When it passed, with the sudden quickness that mountain storms have, as if they had suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be, the sky turned a washed, clean blue, and the gardens shone with an intensity that only exists after rain. The monk came inside calmly. He got a towel, changed his clothes, sat down to drink tea with the others, as if nothing unusual had happened.
Enlightenment is simple.
The youngest monk
Why do we
couldn't hold
stumble
back.
so often, teacher?
Why did you stay outside? You're completely soaked. You could have gotten sick. It makes no sense to stay out in a storm like that when there was shelter available. The older monk blew on the hot tea before answering. There was no rush in the way he did it, as if the question deserved a moment of consideration before receiving a response. I was listening, he said finally. Listening to what? The rain? Listening to what the rain had to say. He paused, looking at the steam rising from the cup. The rain doesn't fall with the intention of soaking you. It doesn't fall with anger. It doesn't fall to ruin your plans or punish your lack of foresight. The rain falls because it is the nature of rain to fall. That's all. When you resist it, when you run from it, when you get angry at it, who is suffering? You or the rain? The young monk was silent. The rain keeps falling the same way, the old man continued. Indifferent to your resistance, indifferent to your acceptance. It falls because it falls. The suffering that you add yourself. But you got soaked anyway, said the young man, still trying to find the flaw in the argument. Yes, said the old man with a calm smile. I got soaked, but I didn't suffer. And there is an enormous difference between being soaked and suffering for being soaked. One is what happens when it rains and you are outside. The other, the suffering, is optional. That one you choose, even if you don't realize you're choosing it. The young monk thought about that for days, weeks, years, actually, because there were so many rains in his life that he resisted without realizing it. So many situations that arrived like storms and against which he fought internally, struggled, exhausted himself trying to avoid the inevitable, trying to control what was beyond control, trying to rewrite what had already happened. Harsh words from people he loved, plans that didn't go as expected. moments of loneliness that arrived without warning in the middle of days that were supposed to be full, memories that returned on the nights when the body wanted to rest, but the mind wouldn't allow it. The rain is going to fall. Sometimes you are going to get soaked. The question the monk was teaching wasn't how to avoid the rain. It was how to stand while it falls, present within it, without making it an enemy, without spending energy fighting something that cannot be stopped, and discovering that when you stop fighting the rain, there is energy left simply to listen to what it has to say. Your mind right now may be doing something similar to what the young monk was doing, resisting something that cannot be resisted. The sleep that hasn't come yet. The thoughts that keep passing even after you've decided they should stop. The feeling that you should be more relaxed than you are, more at peace, further from the events of the day. What if you simply stopped resisting all of that? What if sleep wasn't something you need to conquer, but something that arrives naturally when you stop trying to force it? Like the rain, it has its own time, its own nature. It cannot be rushed, cannot be forced. It can only be received when you stop closing the door against it and simply let the night come in. Story 3. The bowl that was full. He was a man of many accomplishments, a university professor at a respected institution, the author of 3 books that had received praise from specialists around the world, an invited speaker at international conferences. He had studied Eastern philosophy for more than 30 years, not as casual curiosity, but with the seriousness of someone who believes that knowledge has the power to transform. He had read original texts in Sanskrit with the help of dictionaries and patient teachers. He had visited monasteries in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Nepal. He had practiced meditation with discipline for years, waking before the sun to sit in silence, maintaining the practice even in his busiest seasons, even when the results seemed non-existent. And he had written about all of it, had taught all of it, had explained to hundreds of students the path to inner peace in a way they found clear, eloquent, and inspiring. But there was something that kept being missing, a gap he couldn't name precisely, but that he felt clearly, especially on the nights when his mind wouldn't rest, when he found himself lying in the dark, reviewing the day's lectures, planning the next days, solving problems mentally that could very well wait until morning. On those nights especially, the gap became more visible, like a window with a crack where cold wind enters even when everything seems closed. He had come to believe that there was a master in the southern mountains who might help him close that crack. It wasn't a rational conclusion. There wasn't enough evidence to justify it academically. It was more an intuition, and he had learned over the years to respect certain intuitions, even when he couldn't explain them. The master received him in his simple cabin, simple in a way the professor found initially disconcerting, because there was something in the simplicity of that space that was more eloquent than any decoration could be. A low table, 2 cushions, a window with a view of the garden, a shelf with a few objects that seemed to have no material value, but that had clearly been placed there with great care. The master offered tea. The professor sat down and, as was his nature, began to speak. He spoke about his readings, about his interpretations of Buddhist teachings, and the ways he had integrated those interpretations with Western philosophy, about the practices he had tried over the years, and the results he had or hadn't obtained, about the conclusions he had
As you can
reached,
see,
the theories he had developed,
an illusion.
the questions
True
that remained
wisdom
open.
lies in the space between
He was
these
an
2
articulate
points.
man. The words came easily, organized, precise. There was clarity in what he
In
said,
the stillness of the night,
the clarity of
we
someone
find the
who has
path
spent
to inner
decades thinking
peace.
about a subject and knows
Breathe
exactly where the borders of
just
their
be.
knowledge lie.
The amber liquid
While he
holds
spoke,
the warmth of
the
the
master
earth,
remained silent,
nourishing the spirit
listening,
with every drop.
or seeming to listen, and
The
began to
storm
pour the
outside
tea.
may rage,
He filled the
but
professor's
here,
bowl carefully
the warmth remains.
and kept pouring. The tea began to overflow. First, it reached the rim. Then, it passed it, running down the sides of the bowl, forming a puddle on the table, dripping to the floor.
I finally understand
The professor interrupted what he was saying. Master, the bowl is overflowing. There's no room for more tea.
Not in chaos, but in rhythm.
The master kept
Let the
pouring for
golden-
one more moment, as if he needed to make sure the point had been made completely, and then stopped. He
The
set
rain
the teapot
cleanses the
down,
world, just as stillness
looked
cleanses
at the
mind.
overflowing bowl.
Find peace in
looked
the
at the
silence
professor.
between your thoughts.
You are like this bowl, he said, with a voice that held no judgment, only observation,
Observe
completely
the rain,
full
Professor.
of
It is
knowledge,
infinite
of
possibility,
interpretations,
returning to the
of
earth.
carefully constructed
We are merely
conclusions,
the vessels
of
for its
certainties
wisdom.
earned over decades. He paused. How can I show you anything new if there is no space for the new to enter? The professor was silent. For the first time in a long time, perhaps for the first time in years, he had no ready answer. Not because the question was intellectually difficult, but because the question had touched something that the intellect couldn't reach on its own. Empty your bowl, the master continued, with the same calm voice. Not your knowledge. I'm not asking you to forget what you've learned. That would be wasteful, and the knowledge you have is real and valuable. But empty your certainty that you already know. Empty the pressure to confirm with each new experience what you already believe. Come with the mind of someone who doesn't yet know, curious, open, without the weight of needing to reach some conclusion at the end. The professor looked at the overflowing bowl of tea and felt, suddenly, the weight of everything he had been carrying for so long. Not the weight of knowledge itself. That was light, almost pleasurable to carry. But the weight of the need to have it, to organize it, to protect it, to use it as a shield against uncertainty. He felt how much energy he had spent over the years not learning, but confirming what he had already learned. Not exploring, but defending territory already conquered. And beneath all of that, he felt a very old tiredness. The tiredness of a mind that never stopped adding something, that never found a moment in which it said to itself, "This is enough. You can stop now." That afternoon, sitting in front of an overflowing bowl of tea in a simple mountain cabin, the professor learned more than he had learned in years of study. He learned that peace is not something you accumulate. It is something that emerges when you stop accumulating. He learned that the empty bowl is not the bowl that has lost something. It is the bowl that finally has space to receive. How much are you still holding right now, in this moment? Not just today's thoughts, but tomorrow's worries that you've already started building before today has even finished. The plans you haven't closed, the conversations you still need to have. The human mind is extraordinary in its capacity to accumulate, but there are moments, and this can be one of them, when the most intelligent thing it can do is simply stop adding anything new. Let the bowl overflow everything that doesn't need to stay tonight. What remains when you stop holding everything? That is the rest you are looking for. Story 4. The Gardener and the Seasons. The monastery was famous throughout the region for its gardens. Not for the most elaborate gardens, nor the most symmetrical, nor the richest in rare species. Other monasteries had more impressive gardens in those respects. What made people travel hours to see these specific gardens was something harder to name. A quality of presence the gardens had, as if each plant had been placed exactly where it needed to be, not by calculation, but by some deeper understanding of what each space was asking for. The man responsible for the gardens had worked in them for 50 years. He was old now, with calloused hands that seemed to have grown along with the roots he had spent decades tending, and a back slightly curved by the geometry of 50 years of bending toward the earth. But there was something in the way he moved among the plants that made visitors stop and look. There was no urgency in any gesture, no tension in any movement. He might be planting a single seed in a hidden corner of the garden, or cleaning an entire bed under the sun, and the quality of attention was always exactly the same, complete, with nothing left over for anywhere else. A journalist who was writing about the monastery became fascinated by him. She spent an entire afternoon watching him work before approaching, as if she needed time to formulate the right question, or perhaps simply to absorb something of the quality of attention he radiated before disturbing it with words. "May I ask you something?" He looked at her with clear, calm eyes. The kind of look that makes you feel that the question you're about to ask has already been anticipated and has already been considered worthy of an answer. "You have been caring for this garden for 50 years, she said. "You've seen each season hundreds of times. The same flowers opening in the same seasons, the same leaves falling in the same weeks. Don't you get bored? Don't you get tired of doing the same thing over and over, of seeing the same cycle repeat year after year?" The gardener looked around the garden for a moment, not like someone searching for an answer, but like someone who wants to make sure they are seeing what they need to see before speaking. "Which season do you find most beautiful?" he asked. She hesitated. It was autumn. The leaves had colors that seemed to have been chosen by someone with an excessive sense of drama, reds that no painter would believe they could reproduce, golds that seemed lit from within, as if the leaf itself were a source of light. "Autumn," she said. "It's so dramatic, so honest about what's happening. And in spring," he said slowly, "when you see the first flowers opening after months of winter, when the earth that seemed dead begins to show the first signs that it was only sleeping, will you find autumn more beautiful than that moment?" She thought about it, and recognized honestly that she probably wouldn't. Spring had a beauty that autumn didn't. Not better, but different. A beauty of return, of kept promise, of life coming back from where it had seemed to have gone away permanently. "The garden," said the gardener, "is most beautiful when it is what it is, not when I want it to be a different season than the one it's in." He paused, as if listening to his own words to make sure they were saying what he wanted them to say. When winter comes and everything seems dead, people get sad. They get cold, impatient, waiting for it to be over. But I know that beneath the snow and ice, the roots are resting, storing what they'll need, processing what happened during the year, preparing the explosion that will come when spring arrives. Winter isn't the absence of life. It's life at rest. The journalist looked at the trees around her, the ones that had already lost nearly all their leaves and presented themselves like ink drawings against the autumn sky. She thought about the winter that was coming. She thought about how there was, in that anticipation, a quiet resistance she rarely acknowledged explicitly, but that was always there. A desire for autumn to last longer, for the cold not to arrive so soon, for beautiful things not to pass so quickly. What if we learned to love winter the way we love autumn? She said aloud, almost without realizing she was speaking. The gardener smiled, a smile that arrived first in his eyes. Then you would never suffer over the weather again. You would suffer over other things, certainly. No one escapes all suffering. But not over the seasons, not over the natural rhythm of things. He went back to his work, moving slowly among the plants with that attention that had no hurry, no other place to be. That was completely and without reservation, right where it was. The journalist stood in the garden for longer after he moved away, listening to the wind through the nearly bare trees, feeling the cool air on her face, looking at the leaves that were still holding on to the branches and those that had already settled on the ground, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that it was good to be exactly where she was. There is a winter that comes for the mind too, at the end of each day. A moment when energy naturally diminishes, when thoughts slow down, when the body begins to ask for what all of nature asks for after a long period of activity. Rest. Not as defeat, not as failure, as a necessary part of the cycle. Many of us resist this inner winter without realizing it. We keep the lights on longer than we need to. We keep processing, planning, reviewing, even when the mind has already begun its own season of rest and is only waiting for consciousness to follow. The gardener didn't fight the seasons. He honored them. He knew that rest wasn't the opposite of growth. It was an essential part of it. That what happens beneath the snow matters as much as what blooms in spring. Your body is asking for this now. Your mind is entering its own winter. Let that happen. The roots know what to do. Story 5. The lantern in the darkness. Her pain had no adequate name. Or rather, it had a name, the simplest, and at the same time most devastating name that exists. But no name could fully capture what it was to wake each morning and have that brief moment of forgetting before remembering, and feel the pain returning as if it were always the first time, and carry that repeated return throughout the day, in waves, with the same raw surprise even after months. She had lost her son. An accident. One of those things that happen and that permanently change the timeline of someone's life, transforming everything that existed before into another country you can no longer visit. Months after the accident, an old friend, with the gentle wisdom of someone who knows when presence matters more than words, convinced her to visit a monastery where a master known for his compassion received people in suffering. The woman went without expectations. She had reached the point where she no longer had the energy to hope that anything could help. But she also didn't have the energy to refuse. So she went. the master received her in a small room with a window that looked out onto a garden. There was tea on the table. There was silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but has a quality of presence, as if the space itself were there to receive whatever needed to be placed in it. The master didn't try to console her, didn't begin with words of wisdom or questions about what had happened. He simply sat with her, completely present, without any rush to get anywhere, without any agenda beyond being there. She began to speak, slowly, with long pauses between sentences, about her son, about who he was, about the small things she still noticed through their absence, about the mornings that were the hardest, about how she had learned to divide the day into manageable pieces, because looking at the whole week was too much. Looking at the month was impossible. The master listened to everything, without interrupting, without trying to fix it, without offering perspectives before she was ready to receive them. When she finished, they sat in silence for a time. Then, the master stood without hurry and went to a cabinet in the corner of the room. He came back with an old lantern, the kind that uses oil, with thin glass around the flame and a metal handle darkened by time. The flame was small, but steady, unperturbed. He placed the lantern on the table between them. "What do you see?" he asked. "A flame," she said. "Look more carefully. What else do you see?" She looked. The flame was small, but it cast enough light to clearly illuminate the master's face, the table between them, the contours of the room, the edges of the window through which the garden appeared in shadows. "The flame illuminates everything around it," she said. "A small flame illuminates quite a lot." Yes.
Even
The master was
strongest
quiet
winds
for a
cannot
moment,
extinguish this flame.
as if giving the observation the
burns
space
still,
it deserved.
a quiet
Your
reminder of the
son
light
was a
within
flame
us
like
all.
that. While he was here, he illuminated everything around him. The faces of the people he loved, the laughter he created, the moments he made possible simply by being present in them. All of that light, the light he cast during the time he was here, that light has already touched what it touched, has already warmed what it warmed, has already changed what it changed. And that, the light he cast, does not disappear when the flame goes out. The woman felt something move inside her. It wasn't the end of the pain. The pain was there as it always was, a weight that had become so familiar she sometimes forgot to feel it, and sometimes felt it with a sharpness that took her breath away. But there was something different in the way she was looking at the flame, and by extension, at the memory of her son. As if for a moment, the memory wasn't only loss, as if there was also presence in it. Darkness, the master continued with a soft voice, exists so that we can see light clearly. Without darkness, there is no contrast, and we don't notice how far a small flame can reach, how much it illuminates from so far away. He looked at her. "You are in the darkness now. That is real, and I am not trying to diminish it, but the darkness is also the place where you can see most clearly, with a precision that bright light doesn't allow, how much that flame illuminated, and still illuminates. Because everything he touched in you, everything that changed because of his presence, everything you learned by loving him, that remains here, inside you, illuminating the path, even though he is no longer outside to hold it. The woman looked at the flame for a long time. The master was silent with her. That night, for the first time since the accident, she slept without waking in the middle of the night with that weight in her chest. Not because the pain had passed, but because she had found a place inside herself to land that wasn't resistance. And in the rest of that non-resistance, the body was finally able to do what it had always known how to do, what it had been trying to do through all those months of difficult nights. Some of the things we carry are too heavy to be resolved in a single night. Some pain has no solution, only companionship, only the possibility of being carried a little differently, with a little more gentleness toward yourself, with a little less resistance to the weight that is still there. Right now, in this moment, you don't need to resolve anything. The pains you carry can be here with you without you needing to do anything with them, without needing to understand them completely, overcome them, or justify to yourself why they are still present. They can simply be, and you can simply rest. The flame that illuminated keeps illuminating, even in the dark, especially in the dark. Story 6. The Master Who Answered with Silence. There was a Zen master who was famous across an entire region for a reason that puzzled many people. He rarely taught with words. When students traveled days or weeks to reach him with carefully constructed philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness, about the path to peace, about how to deal with suffering in ways that books couldn't adequately explain, he frequently responded with silence, or with a gesture, or simply continued what he was doing as if the question were its own answer, as if the only thing needed was to observe what was happening in that specific moment with eyes quiet enough to see.
What if they find it first?
Many students became frustrated with this. Some left convinced that the master was pretentious, or that his reputation had been exaggerated. Others stayed and stayed, waiting patiently, until at some point, usually when they had stopped actively waiting, something opened. A young monk from another monastery had traveled 10 days to reach him. There was a question that had been troubling him for years, not as an intellectual problem he couldn't solve, but as a wound that kept returning, especially on sleepless nights, when the mind refused to give the body rest and kept turning in circles that led nowhere new. The question was simple. What is peace? Not in a political or historical sense. In the internal sense, in the sense of, what is this thing that all the teachings describe, and that he could glimpse briefly in some moments of practice, but that slipped away so quickly that sometimes he doubted it had been real. He found the master in the garden. It was a late winter afternoon, the kind where the air is still cold, but the light begins to have a different quality, as if the sun had remembered an intention it had forgotten during the darker months. The master was sitting on a large stone, simply sitting, not in a formal meditation posture, not doing anything that seemed particularly significant. Simply sitting, with his face slightly turned toward the light, his eyes partially closed. The young monk approached respectfully and asked his question. Master, what is peace? The master didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched for a time that felt too long to be comfortable. Long enough for the young man to begin wondering whether he had been heard, whether he should repeat the question, whether he had done something wrong in the way of asking. Then, the master raised one hand slightly and pointed toward a nearby tree. A leaf was detaching from a branch, not dramatically, not in a gust of wind, but with that silent slowness that leaves have when their time has come, and they simply go. They both watched the leaf fall. It didn't fall in a straight line. It descended in gentle spirals, turning slightly around itself, taking the path the air offered without resistance, without hurry, without apparent concern for where it would land, until it settled on the ground with a lightness that barely disturbed the silence around it. The master looked at the young monk. The young monk looked at the leaf on the ground, and then understood, not with the mind analyzing and concluding, with something deeper than the mind, with that part that doesn't need words to recognize what is true,
Even in darkness,
that knows before
there is
knowing
light.
it knows.
The
The leaf
continues
had not fought against
softly.
gravity, had not tried to return to the tree it came from, had not asked whether the path was correct, whether there was a better way to fall, whether it would arrive somewhere suitable. It had simply followed what was natural, with a total, absolute, unconscious trust of one who knows the ground will be there when it arrives. That was peace. Not the absence of movement, not the absence of change or journey, but movement without resistance, change without struggle, the journey without the anxiety of arrival. The young monk was silent for a long time. The master went back to looking at the garden, at the light that kept changing as the afternoon advanced. After a few minutes, the young man said quietly, "Thank you." And the master simply nodded, continuing to look at the garden with those eyes that seemed to be seeing not only what was there visibly, but something quieter that existed behind all visible things. You are descending now, not dramatically, not in a fall, like the leaf, in gentle spirals, taking the path the air offers, without resistance, without hurry. Your mind may still be trying to figure out what rest is, trying to confirm whether you're relaxing the right way, whether you're close enough to sleep, whether you should be doing something different from what you're doing now. But rest is like the falling leaf. It doesn't need your help to happen. It only needs you to stop fighting gravity. The ground will be there when you arrive. It always has been. Story 7. The Bridge, and what was left behind. Two monks were traveling together through the countryside, returning from a pilgrimage that had lasted several weeks. The road back was different from the road there, shorter in distance but harder in terrain, cutting through valleys and crossing rivers that in the rainy season ran full and unpredictable. They arrived at a river that had swelled with the recent rains. The water was fast and opaque, the kind that carries sediment and small branches and makes enough noise that you need to speak louder to be heard by the person beside you. The only way to cross without getting completely wet was over a row of flat stones that served as an improvised bridge, but that were slippery and required attention with every step. Beside the stones stood a woman. She was well dressed, in clothes that had clearly not been planned for that kind of terrain, and was looking at the stones with the expression of someone who has been carefully weighing the risk in their mind, but has concluded that the risk exists regardless of how long you spend weighing it.
Beautiful tonight, brother.
The first monk,
The rain
without
brings
saying
peace
anything,
to the garden.
and without hesitating, approached the woman, gestured to ask if she wanted help, and when she nodded yes, carried her carefully in his arms and crossed the slippery stones with deliberate, secure steps, setting her down on the other bank With a naturalness that made no drama of what he had done, the woman thanked him. The two monks continued their journey. For hours, the second monk said nothing. But there was something in the quality of his silence that was different from the silence of the journey's peaceful moments. There was tension in his shoulders, a subtle stiffness in the way he walked, a breathing slightly shorter than usual. When the sun was low and the two were close to the monastery, the second monk stopped in the middle of the road. "I need to say something," he began, and there was in his voice a containment that suggested he had waited longer than comfortable to speak. "How could you do that? You know very well that our vows prohibit any physical contact with women. You carried her in your arms, in front of anyone who might have been watching. That is a direct violation of what we promised when..." The first monk looked at him calmly, without defensiveness, without rushing to answer. "I set that woman down on the riverbank hours ago," he said gently. "When I placed her on the ground on the other side, I left her there. Why are you still carrying her?" The second monk opened his mouth, closed it, stood in the middle of the road looking at the first monk while something reorganized internally. Like when an image you've been seeing too closely suddenly makes sense when you take a step back. It was true. The first monk had done what the situation called for, had helped someone who needed help, had crossed the river, and had left the episode where it had happened, on the other side of the river, in the immediate past, exactly where it belonged, had continued with a clean mind and a light step. The second monk had carried that woman with him for hours, had built a careful internal case, had rehearsed arguments, had felt an indignation that served no one in the world, and that weighed exclusively on himself, draining the energy that could have been used simply to enjoy the road back. The river had been left behind long ago, but the mind, the second monk's mind, had not accompanied the body across. How many people are you still carrying tonight? Not physically, mentally, emotionally. That conversation from days ago that you're still reviewing, finding new ways you could have responded better, or said less, or explained differently. That situation that has already passed, but that your mind keeps visiting, adding details you didn't notice at the time, building alternative versions of what could have happened if you had done something different. The river is behind you. Tonight, you can leave some things on the bank where they belong. Not because they don't matter, but because carrying them while you should be resting doesn't resolve them. It only makes you more tired, and you arrive at tomorrow heavier than you need to be. They will be there if you need them. But right now, the road that remains is light, and you can walk it that way. Story 8. The Pot with the Crack. In a small village in the countryside, there was an elderly woman who had a simple and unchanging routine. Every day, early in the morning, she walked from the edge of the village to the river, a path of about 20 minutes, along a trail she had walked so many times that her feet knew it better than her eyes. She carried a bamboo pole across her shoulders, and hanging from each end was a clay pot. One of the pots was perfect, smooth, flawless, waterproof. It arrived home full to the brim every morning. The other pot had a thin crack at the bottom, small enough not to be visible at first glance, but enough for half the water to leak out during the walk home. That pot always arrived at the house half full. After 2 years of this, the cracked pot became so weighed down by shame that it decided to speak.
Reminding us that even the
"I need to
oldest things are
apologize,"
renewed by the cycle
the
of
pot said to
nature.
the woman one morning as
In
she
the
was filling
quiet
it
of
at the
the
river.
night, the ancient
"For 2
stream
years,
offers its
I can only bring you
clearest
half the
gifts.
water. Because of my flaw, you work twice as hard to have what any normal person would have. While the other pot
Even
arrives
the broken
full,
things can hold
I
the most
arrive half
beauty.
empty. I am
The
half
rain washes
useless."
the past, but the
The
gold
woman set the
remains.
pot down
In
carefully
the quiet stillness
and
of
looked
the
at it with an
garden,
expression
you
that
find
wasn't
peace.
pity.
Let your
It was
heart
something
be
more
guided
solid
by
than
the
pity.
light within.
"Have you noticed the flowers on the left side of the path?" the pot thought. There were flowers along the path.
The spring
There were
rain
always
falls
flowers in
softly on
spring
the
and
temple
summer.
garden, washing the world
But
in violet
it had
and
never
sage.
paid enough
Follow
attention
the
to notice
path where the
details.
light touches the water.
"Look next
The garden
time,"
awaits those
said
who
the
walk
woman.
softly in the rain.
"Look carefully at which side they grow on." On the walk home, the pot looked and saw that there was,
Here,
along the
where the
entire left
crimson
side of the
meets
path,
cobalt,
the side where it was
the
carried,
spirit finds peace
a
in
dense
the
and
gentle
abundant
rain.
row of wildflowers in colors that competed with the sky. Flowers that hadn't been there in the beginning, that had grown over the 2 years, watered every day by the water leaking through the crack. On the right side, where the perfect pot was carried, the ground was dry. There was grass, stones, earth.
The flame reminds us
But
that
not
even
those
in
flowers.
darkness there is always light.
"I always knew about your
Be
crack,"
patient, breathe,
the woman said when
and
they
simply
arrived home.
be.
"From the very first day. That's why I planted seeds along that side of the path." She looked at the pot with the same solid expression as before. "You water those flowers every day. Because of you, I have flowers to bring to the temple, to give to neighbors on important occasions, to place in the window when I need beauty near. If you were perfect like the other pot, none of this would exist. The path would be more efficient, and it would be drier." The pot was silent. Every morning it had woken feeling the weight of being insufficient. Every moment it had compared itself to the perfect pot on the other side and found its own existence lacking. All that time, without knowing, without realizing, without any intention of doing anything other than trying and failing, it had been watering flowers. There are things in you that you probably consider flaws, places where you didn't arrive where you wanted, ways you responded to situations and wish you had responded differently. Aspects of who you are that you would prefer were different. But flowers grow where the water falls. Even if it's half the water, even if it falls through a crack, even if no one planned for them to grow there. Tonight, you can rest without needing to be perfect, without needing to have done everything right today, without needing to have been the most efficient version of yourself. The path of tomorrow already has flowers you are watering right now, without knowing, without realizing, simply by being who you are, crack and all. Story 9. The Student and the Cold Tea. He hadn't slept well in months, not in the acute, dramatic way of someone with severe insomnia. It was something more gradual, more insidious. A slow erosion of sleep quality that happens when the mind learns that night is the time to process everything. The day didn't have time to process. He was a final year medical student. The volume of information he needed to absorb was real. The hours of clinical rotations were real. The pressure of final exams was real. It wasn't imagination, wasn't weakness, wasn't something that could be fixed with more discipline. But he had reached the point where the tiredness of not sleeping well had become a problem that added layers to the original problem. the exhausted mind making mistakes the rested mind wouldn't make, the irritability that arrived around 3 in the afternoon and made everything harder, the cycle that fed on itself. A professor who knew him well suggested he visit a monastery in the mountains where there was a master who received people in states of exhaustion. The student went without much faith, but also without the energy to resist the suggestion. The master received him and, before anything else, asked if he wanted tea. The student said yes. What followed was one of the strangest experiences the student had had. The master prepared the tea with a deliberate slowness that initially mildly irritated him. Each gesture executed with the total attention one normally reserves for important things. Boiling the water at the correct temperature, warming the cup before pouring, measuring the leaves carefully, letting the tea rest for exactly the right time, as if preparing tea were the most important thing in the world at that moment. When the tea was ready, the master placed the cup on the table before the student. The student looked at it. It was at the perfect temperature. There was a faint steam rising, indicating it was hot but not too hot to drink right away. The aroma was good. There was something in the whole of it. The simple cup, the well-prepared tea, the aroma, that made the room seem quieter than it was. But then someone knocked at the door. An unexpected visitor. The master went to receive them with the same calm with which he had done everything else. The conversation stretched.
The rain washes away
It
the
wasn't a
dust of the world,
conversation that
doesn't
could be
it?
cut short without
Indeed.
rudeness.
And reveals the
10
path
minutes.
beneath.
20 minutes. 30. The student waited, looked at the tea, watched the steam diminish as the temperature fell, thought about drinking without waiting for the master, decided to wait, kept looking at the tea growing cold. When the master returned, he sat down calmly, looked at the cup, looked at the student. "Can you tell me where the heat went?" The student was slightly surprised by the question. It was the last thing he had expected to hear. "It dissipated into the air," he said. "It's the second law of thermodynamics. Warmer systems transfer heat to cooler environments until thermal equilibrium is reached." And did the tea get angry about losing its heat? Tea doesn't have emotions. And did the heat get angry about leaving the tea? No. Heat has no intention. It simply followed physical laws. "So, what happened was completely neutral," said the master. "The heat was in the tea. The time came for the heat to go elsewhere. The tea became cooler, without drama, without resistance from either side, simply the natural process happening." The student began to feel where this was going. "Your tiredness," said the master,
Observe
"is
how
like
the
that
water
heat.
cleanses the world
You
outside,
invested energy in things that
just as
mattered.
meditation cleanses
The energy
mind
went.
within.
What remains
True
is the natural
enlightenment
state of
comes
someone who
not
gave a
from
great deal.
seeking, but from
It's not a
quiet
flaw.
observation.
It's not weakness. It's physics." He paused. "But there is a difference between being tired and suffering for being tired.
The tea is cold.
The tea doesn't suffer
Just
for
as it
being
should be.
cold. It simply is cold. You are tired. That is real. But the additional suffering of fighting the tiredness, of demanding energy that doesn't exist, of judging yourself for needing rest, that suffering is a second cup of tea that nobody ordered." The student looked at the cup of cold tea for a long moment, then picked up the cup and drank. The cold tea had a different quality from hot tea. Not worse, different. Cleaner, perhaps. Quieter. Rest,
With each
said the
breath,
master simply,
with each beat of the
not
Mokugyo,
because you deserve
we
rest after
return to
giving
the
so much,
stillness of the present moment.
although that is also true, but because rest is what happens naturally when you stop fighting the cold. That night, the student slept for 9 hours straight for the first time in months. Not because the problem had been solved, but because he had stopped fighting his own tiredness and discovered that without that fight, the body knew exactly what to do. The tiredness you feel right now is not your enemy. It is the record of everything you invested, of everything you tried, of everything you carried, sometimes with grace, sometimes only with stubbornness, sometimes simply because there was no other option. You don't need to fight it tonight. Don't need to overcome it. Don't need to wake up tomorrow with all the energy you don't have right now. Let the heat go into the air, into the night, into the place where things that have already been go. And what stays after? The quiet cup, the body that knows how to rest. That is the sleep arriving. Story 10. The Musician and the Wrong Note. There was a musician who had devoted his life to his instrument. From childhood, before he even understood what he was doing, he had already been spending hours with his hands on the strings, not practicing in a structured way, but simply exploring, listening, finding connections between sounds that no one had taught him to find. There was something in it that felt more natural than anything else, more natural than speaking, more natural than writing, more natural than any other form of expressing what was inside. Over time,
Patience is
the
path
practice
to
became
wisdom.
more serious.
Now,
Teachers,
return to your breath.
specific hours, techniques to master, scales to memorize, repertoire to build, and with the seriousness came excellence. The musician became very good, then became extraordinary, then reached the level at which other people treated him with the kind of reverence reserved for those who do something difficult in a way that seems completely effortless. But there was something that had changed over those years that he was only able to name when he stopped to look for what was wrong. He had lost the joy. Not completely. There were still moments, especially in live performances, when everything was going well, when something opened and he remembered why he had started. But they were increasingly rare moments. Most of the time, playing had become a way of managing the fear of making mistakes. Every performance was preceded by hours of anxiety, every wrong note, even ones no one in the audience had noticed, stayed with him for days, revisited, analyzed, used as evidence against himself. And the nights after important performances were often the worst. The mind wouldn't let the body rest, kept reviewing, kept judging, kept building an internal tribunal in which he was always the defendant. That's how he arrived at the monastery, not seeking spiritual wisdom specifically, seeking simply a way to sleep. The master listened to him carefully and then asked a question the musician hadn't expected. When you play a wrong note during a performance, what happens to the music? It continues, said the musician, not yet understanding where the question was going. The music continues, repeated the master. The wrong note was. The next note came. The music did not stop to mourn the note that had passed. He paused. Have you ever stopped to notice that the music is wiser than you about this? The musician was silent. The wrong note exists for a fraction of a second. The master continued.
The path to
And
inner
then
peace
it is
begins
part of the
not in
past.
absence of noise,
It is
but in the
unrecoverable,
stillness within the rain.
unremediable, and completely irrelevant to the next note. The music knows this. The music does not carry the wrong note into the next phrase, does not allow the error of one moment to contaminate the possibility of the next moment. But I carry it, the musician said quietly. You carry it. And in carrying it, you bring into the present moment the weight of something that has already ended, as if you were trying to play the next note with one hand occupied, holding the wrong note that has already gone. The master looked at him.
May all beings
Wrong
be
notes
peaceful.
are part of music.
May all beings be happy
They always
and
have
free
been.
from suffering.
The greatest musicians who ever lived played wrong notes. The difference between them and someone who can't sleep after a performance isn't that they played fewer wrong notes. It's that they left each wrong note at the exact moment it ended. The musician spent the entire afternoon thinking about that. That
In the
night,
silence of the night,
before sleeping,
the rain washes away
he imagined the
distractions
last
of the
performance,
world, leaving only
the concert
present
from the week
moment.
before. That had kept him awake for 3 nights. He imagined the notes he had played wrong, the 2 that were clearly audible, the others smaller that probably only he had noticed. And instead of revisiting them with the usual judgment, he tried something different. He tried to hear them as part of the music that had been played, not as flaws that had corrupted something that could have been perfect, but as notes that had existed for a moment and then given way to the notes that came after, as part of a music that had happened and that now belonged to the past, where things that have happened go. He couldn't do it completely. The habit of years doesn't change in a night, but he managed enough that, for the first time in weeks, the mind rested before the body had to ask for it. He slept, and in the dreams, there was music, imperfect, alive, completely present in each note, including the wrong ones. The notes you played wrong today have already ended. The words that came out differently than you wanted. The decisions that could have been different. The moments when you weren't the most patient, most present, most generous version of yourself. They existed. And now they are past. The next note, the next moment, the next day doesn't need to carry their weight, can begin from 0, the way every note begins from 0, regardless of what came before. Tonight can be the 0 of tomorrow. Let the music continue. Story 11. The river that never stops. There was a woman who had lived beside a river since she was a child. Not the same river in terms of water. She knew that, had studied enough to understand that the water passing in front of her house at this moment was different from the water that had passed yesterday, that it would be different from the water that would pass tomorrow. The river was a process, not a thing, a continuous event, not a fixed object. But the river seemed the same, had the same name, made the same sound, occupied the same space between the same banks she had learned to know since childhood. She had sat by that river in every important moment of her life. When she was 6 years old and her dog had died, she had sat there and cried until she had no more tears. When she was 16 and had fallen in love for the first time, she had sat there looking at the water with that expression that only exists when someone is so full of something that it doesn't fit entirely inside their own body. When she had passed her university entrance exams, she had run to the river before telling anyone in the family. When she had lost her job years later, she had gone to the river before she could bring herself to go home. The river had received all of this without comment, without judgment, without advice, simply continuing to be what it was. Water in motion, always different, always the same. As she grew older, she began having trouble sleeping. There wasn't one specific reason. It was a combination of things, as it usually is. Metabolism changing, worries that with age become more concrete and less theoretical. The growing awareness that time is finite, that there are things that won't get done, that there are people who won't always be there. On one of those difficult nights, at 2 a.m, she got up and went to the river. The night was warm. The moon was high and reflected in the water in a way that made the river visible even without other light sources. The sound of the water was the same as always. That continuous sound she had heard so many times that she normally didn't hear it anymore. That had become part of the background silence of life. She sat on the large stone that had always been her stone, the stone where she had sat in all those moments across the years, and looked at the river, and noticed something she had never noticed so clearly before. The river never stopped. In all the time she had spent beside it, decades of moments distributed across a lifetime, the river had continued. While she cried over the dog, the river continued. While she experienced her first love, the river continued. While she celebrated, while she suffered, while she grew, while she aged, the river continued, indifferent and faithful at the same time, always different and always the same. And she also noticed something about herself, that she had also never really stopped. Not in the sense that she had always been in physical motion. She had slept, had rested, had been still in many moments, but in the sense that she had continued. In the same way, the river continued. She had passed through all those things, the difficult ones and the beautiful ones, and she had continued. Each thing that had seemed definitive in its moment had become past, and she had continued. The water that had passed before her on that night when she was 6 years old would never come back. The water passing now would never come back after this night. And yet, the river was the river. And yet,
As the river
she was
flows
she.
softly into the night,
there was
the
something
heart
in that
finds
which
its
wasn't exactly
stillness amidst the
consolation.
mist.
It was larger than consolation. It was the perception of a continuity that didn't depend on any specific thing continuing. That existed in the movement itself, not in the specific waters that passed. She sat on the stone until the sky began to lighten on the horizon. She hadn't resolved anything. The worries that had woken her were still real. Time was still finite. The losses she had suffered were still losses. But there was something different in the way she was carrying all of it when she finally stood up and walked back home. As if she had remembered something she had always known, but that she sometimes forgot for too long at a time, that she was the river, she was not the water. That what matters isn't that any specific wave stops. It's that the movement continues. That continuing is what she had done her entire life. And that continuing was enough. You have been continuing. Through everything this week brought, through everything this month brought, through everything this year brought, you continued. Each thing that seemed definitive in its moment became part of the past. And you are here. The river never stops. And you who are here right now, listening to this, letting the body rest while the stories do their quiet work, you don't stop either. Not in the way that matters. Not in the continuity that is deeper than any specific wave. Tonight is part of the river. Tomorrow will be part of the river. And right now you can rest in the current without needing to control where it goes, knowing that the movement will continue with or without the effort of directing it. The river knows the way. Rest. There is one last thing worth saying about the stories we heard tonight. None of them end with the character having completely solved their problem. The young man beside the lake didn't wake the next day with a permanently quiet mind. The woman who lost her son didn't leave the meeting with the master cured of her grief. The medical student didn't return to school without stress. That is intentional, because these stories are not about resolving. They are about changing your relationship with what is present. The lake keeps receiving stones. The rain keeps falling. The bowl keeps being filled. The seasons keep arriving and leaving. Flames go out. Leaves fall. Rivers need to be crossed. Pots have cracks. Tea goes cold. Notes get played wrong. And in the middle of all of that, exactly in the middle of all of that, not on the other side of it, there is the possibility of peace, not as the absence of difficulty, but as the presence of something deeper than the difficulty, something that is there before the difficulty arrives and that remains after it passes, something that no stone reaches, that the rain doesn't carry away, that the full bowl cannot smother. The Zen masters had many names for this. Some called it Buddha nature. Others called it original mind. Others simply pointed at a stone or a falling leaf or a cup of cold tea and waited for the student to see for themselves. Because it cannot be given, it can only be recognized. And recognition requires no effort. It requires stillness. The stillness your body is seeking right now. The stillness that is arriving, not because you are doing something right, but because you are finally stopping doing something wrong. Let it come. One breath. Feel the weight of your body. Every point of contact with the surface that holds you. The surface is not making an effort to hold you. It is simply there, and the weight of your body meets that support without any instruction from either side. Trust that in the same way, sleep will come in the same way that support comes, not because you have earned it, but because you are simply here, present, without resistance. The stories of tonight have already done their work. The stories you carry from the day can also rest now. There is a deep lake inside you that no stone reaches. There is a leaf that already knows the way to the ground. There are stars that were waiting for you before you knew you were looking for them. And there is this night, quiet, patient, unhurried, waiting simply for you to arrive. You are already here. Good night. There is something the monks always understood about the relationship between stillness and time. We live inside time as if it were a river we are forced to swim against, always fighting the current, always trying to get somewhere faster, always measuring how far we still have to go. The past pulls at us from behind, and the future pulls at us from the front. And in the middle of all that pulling, the present, the only place where anything actually exists, keeps slipping by unnoticed. But what the monks discovered, sitting in their mountain monasteries for years and decades, was that time doesn't actually work the way we experience it. Time is not a river you swim against. Time is more like the lake we visited in our first story. where the surface moves and ripples and seems to be in constant motion, but where the depths are always, always still. The past is not behind you pulling. The past is simply past. A stone that was thrown and whose ripples have long since faded. You carry the past only when you choose to keep throwing the same stone. Keep watching the same ripples expand. Keep insisting that the surface move in ways it has already finished moving. The future is not ahead of you demanding something. The future is simply not yet. A stone that hasn't been thrown. You suffer the future only when you imagine throwing it before your hand is actually ready to throw. Right now, in this moment, in this breath, in this particular arrangement of darkness and quiet, and the weight of your body against whatever holds it, there are no past stones and no future stones. There is only the surface of this moment, which is as still as you allow it to be. The monks called this practice. They said it took years to master. But they also said that even the briefest glimpse of it, even the shortest moment of actually being here, without the past pulling and the future demanding, was enough to change something. Enough to give the body the signal it had been waiting for. The signal that it is safe to rest. Your body has been waiting for that signal. It has been waiting patiently, the way the lake waits. The way the bottom of the lake is always still, always there, regardless of what is happening at the surface. The events of the day happened at the surface. The worries about tomorrow will happen at the surface. The conversations and the decisions and the things you forgot to do and the things you wish you'd done differently, all surface. Below all of that, you are still. You have always been still. The stillness didn't go anywhere. It was here before the day started, and it is here now that the day has ended, and it will be here tomorrow when a new day begins. This is what the monks were pointing at, with all their stories and their silences and their gestures toward falling leaves. Not a technique, not a state to achieve. A recognition of what is already here, already present, already available. The moment you stop looking for it somewhere else. Breathe in slowly, not forcing anything, not trying to breathe correctly. Simply letting the breath happen the way it has been happening your entire life, through every night of sleep you've ever had, through every moment of rest you've ever known. Your body knows how to breathe. You don't need to teach it. Your body knows how to rest. You don't need to teach it that either. What you can do, the only thing that is actually being asked of you right now, is to get out of your body's way, to let the ancient intelligence of this organism do what it has always done, to trust that the lake knows how to be still, that the leaf knows how to fall, that the river knows its way. The last thing the old masters used to say before their students went to sleep was not an instruction. It wasn't a reminder. It wasn't a warning or a lesson or a thing to remember. It was simply a permission. Permission to stop for a few hours. The extraordinary effort of being a human being with a past to carry and a future to navigate and a present that keeps slipping by faster than you can catch it. Permission to be, for these hours, something simpler than all of that. Something as simple as a sleeping body and a quiet mind. Something as simple as breath moving in and out without asking permission. Something as simple as the darkness at the bottom of the lake that has been still since long before any stone was ever thrown. You have that permission now. You have always had it. The only thing standing between you and rest is the belief that you need to do something else before you can have it. You don't. This is enough. You are enough. Good night.